Hey, Stephen on here doing the junkyard crawl at Bernardston Auto Wrecking in Bernardston, Massachusetts with a 1965 Ford Thunderbird hardtop. Now, 1965, this was the most expensive Ford you could get, and the only one priced over $4,000 in base trim. In fact, this was $4,394 base price. Now, the only more expensive Mustang vehicle in 1964, I gave it away, or 65, would have been the GT350, which would have cost $153 more than this Thunderbird. But again, for $43.94, this is the most expensive earthbound Ford you could buy in 1965. When I say earthbound, we're talking, of course, about the Thunderbird's ability to fly. Now, 1955 was the first year for Thunderbird, and it was a two-seater. It was kind of Ford's answer to the Corvette. But by 1965, the Corvette and Thunderbird went radically different directions. These were big, heavy cars. Nothing like a Corvette. Now, one thing that's weird about Thunderbird in this era was the unit construction. We can see right here, these inner shock towers here are integral to the frame and the firewall. This is not body on frame as the Baby Bird was back in 1955, 6, 7. These are unit construction cars, and every single one of these things in 1965 came with the one and only Z-code 390 4-barrel, 300 horsepower. 1966 would bring the optional 428 Q code, but for here we have the basic one-size-fits-all 390. And kind of cool, this little tag right here. Here it is, 390 65. This is one of the Ford identification tags right here. Very cool piece. If that said 427, how cool it would be. But again, no 427s in Thunderbirds, unless you were talking about Tasca Ford and some of the hot rods they put together. But this ain't one of them. But again, 1965 Thunderbird, a very luxurious car, packed with standard features. Luxury air conditioning was an option, but that was about the only thing that was optional. Power steering, power brakes, all of it. And the styling on these things was interesting. You know, the use of die-cast metals like this. It's sort of an aluminum, maybe magnesium, not sure. It doesn't rust, it doesn't corrode that much, but again, this is one of those cool sort of teardrop headlights, the inserts right here. And again, these, unlike the steel, don't rust, but again, very aggressive front bumper on these things. And we look around here, something big, and a really big thing actually for 1965 was the first use of disc brakes. There it is right there. And you got to keep in mind that the curb weight on the original 55 T-Bird was 2,980 pounds. Well, for 65, this thing grew 1,500 pounds. These are 4,470 pound cars. And finally, the drum brakes that were used on all T-Birds back to 55 gave way to these standard front disc brakes in 1965 on up. And something that was needed to accommodate the rotor and the caliper of these discs was new wheels for 65, 15-inch wheels versus the 14s used in 64. And these are unique to Thunderbird. If you look at this, there's no vents, there's no there's the spider in the hoop, there's no notches. These are solid wheels, and again, specific to Thunderbird, 1965. Kind of a rare thing right there. I'm not going to say rare bird, I'm not going to do it. Inside, don't look for any 4-speed transmissions, no 3-speeds for that matter, just automatics. But something kind of cool. We'll trade spots here. We go around there if you want. Shane, Super Shane Richardson, cameraman, superb. All Thunderbird standard equipment was this, the steering column that slides in and out to make entry and egress, look at that, I sound like Road and Track magazine, entry and egress easier, right there, and that's standard stuff. And look at this, disc brake on the brake pedal right there. That tells you, of course, hey, I got disc brakes this year, kind of cool, look at me. Of course, this does have the console, or did have the console in the middle there, bucket seats up front, a lot of insulation on these cars, power windows, and just basically a lot of, you know, built-in standard luxury stuff. And in this one, we do have the door tag. It's right here on the end of the door. Let's take a peek at that. You can see it's right here. Let's decode that. We see 63A, which is the code for the Thunderbird hardtop, of which 74,974 were built. 90% of T-Birds were hardtops like this one. Q is Brittany Blue. 22 is the blue vinyl interior. 13 means it was delivered to the New York dealer zone. And unfortunately, 1 on the axle means it's a 3-to-1 open differential. I always say a letter is better when it comes to Thunderbird and Ford VIN, or axle tags of 1965. 65, and I know some say that trucks are different, but generally speaking, on a Thunderbird or a Mustang, a lesser is better. That would have been a 3-to-1 limited slip. This is the 1 open diff. And of course, 4 is that cruise-o-matic automatic transmission, the only transmission you could get in T-Bird for 65. Now, the cool thing about these do all have a 9-inch rear axle, and at the back, of course, no disc brakes on the back of T-Bird till you get into the mid-1980s with the turbo coupes, but again, big 11-inch drum, flared, finned, ready to dissipate heat. Leaf springs in the back, believe it or not. T-Bird would go to coil springs in 1967, 2 years after this thing was built, but leaf springs were the rule, except for 58. 1958 Thunderbirds had coils in the back, 1-year deal. But speaking of 1 year, first year, 1965 was the first year for the sequential taillights on Thunderbird. Now they're missing here, but if you know your T-Birds, you'll remember that they would go blink, blink, blink. If you took a left, they'd blink from the middle out. The sequential system, new for 65. And let's see if it's still here, but there would be a mechanical sequence unit. Crap, it's not here. Here's the wiring harness for it, but right up inside of here would be a sock with fiberglass insulation like this around it. Inside of it would be a mechanical computer, basically a little camshaft driven by an electric motor that would hit contact points that would blink, 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 blink. And if those taillights look familiar to people who own 67 up Shelby Mustangs, that's because the system was adopted for the GT350 and GT500 in 67 through 70, and the Mercury Cougar in 1967. And here is Motor Trend magazine right here, October 1964. Do I hear a strange whining sound? Canceled? What do you mean we're canceled? Anyway, in here we have all the new 65s, including the new T-Bird, and the words up top says, Husky power-assisted front discs are now standard equipment on the Thunderbird, and it says new sequential rear turn signals by a sequential arrangement. These blip the taillight segments from the inside outward, and on the next page we should see that. Fumbling and bumbling. Here we go. Yeah, top left, you can see there's the new T-Bird, and they say the new Thunderbird holds the line with minor changes from 64, among them different hood emblem and vents, but on the right, taillights, lights flash in sequence. Now, 64 introduced that style of taillight, but they weren't yet sequential. That would first happen in 65, right here. Other things you find in the trunk, nicely covered paneling here, sort of a fabric, kind of cool, all standard stuff. You won't find that in a Dodge Dart or a Ford Falcon, speaking of birds. But again, behind it we can see this sort of felt silencing here, sort of a sound deadening effect. And then this is kind of cool, the factory bird's nest right here. Nice to see that right there, good stuff. And glass window, of course, tinted windows on these. And here's remnants of that Brittany blue paint right here. And again, the trunk underside is always the most protected part of any car. Doesn't see much exposure to water, rain, anything like that. Under the hood is sometimes good, but the engine, of course, is always making noxious fumes and heat and cooking that up. But under here, Brittany blue, the original. Now this is, again, 1965, the next to last year for this styling cycle. For 1967, believe it or not, a 4-door Thunderbird was a possibility, and that, of course, made it through 69. The only time T-Bird could be had with 4 doors. Something kind of cool here again on the back of this is the remnants of the formal roofline, first seen in 1962 on the Fords and the Galaxies. But down here, very cool use of metal and vent work. That's actually a vent right there, which exhausts air from the inside of the car. All the ants right here going crazy. I just disturbed their summer home. They'll make more, not an issue. Oh, the little larvae. Look at the larvae, like larvae, larvae, whatever they are. Anyway, ants on a bird. There you have it here in the junkyard. But with that said, that's the story of 1965, the beginning of disc brakes, the beginning of sequential taillights, but the next to the last year for this styling cycle. Before T-Bird really got big, it went to coil springs and 4 doors and continued its march onward and upward and way far away from the Chevy Corvette. And again, for $4,394, would you have bought this or for another $160, a GT350 in 1965? I think I know the answer. With that said, a lot more people bought these than GT350 Mustangs, and that makes sense. Now, if you like this video, be sure to subscribe to the Steve Mag's YouTube channel, hit the bell, and that'll tell you when the next video comes out, which is tomorrow.